The kitchen smells like coffee that's gone cold. Eleanor Blackwood stands at the center of Clara's kitchen like she owns the geometry of the room, shoulders squared beneath a charcoal coat that cost more than Clara's rent. Her handbag sits on the counter, not the table. The counter, because the counter is granite. The table is just pine. She hasn't been invited to sit. She doesn't need to be. Eleanor doesn't wait for invitations. She issues them. And right now, she's issuing something far worse. Oliver attends Millbrook Elementary, Eleanor says. Not a question. A recitation. Room 14B, Mrs. Patterson, 3rd grade. He walks to school along Birch Lane, takes the shortcut through the park and sits on the second bench from the fountain to eat his lunch. Alone. She pauses, lets that word breathe. He prefers the left swing, the one with the squeaky chain. And in February he missed 4 days of school with a chest cold that you treated with over-the-counter cough syrup instead of taking him to a proper doctor. Clara's back presses against the wall beside the refrigerator, not leaning, pressed, like the house itself is the only thing keeping her upright. Her right hand drifts to her collarbone, fingers curling against the skin just below her throat. She makes this gesture when the words stacking behind her teeth are too dangerous to release, when the thing she wants to say would cost her something she can't afford to lose. Eleanor watches that hand, recognizes it, files it away. You've done a serviceable job, Eleanor continues, and the pause before that word is surgical, considering your resources, considering your circumstances, considering you never told my son he had a child. Get out of my house. I'm not finished. You were finished the moment you walked in without knocking. Eleanor smiles. It doesn't reach her eyes. It was never designed to. You'll lose him, she says quietly. Just like before, every person who has ever tried to keep a Blackwood child from the Blackwood family has lost. I'll make sure of it this time. Not because I want to, understand that, Clara. Because I have to. Because you are not enough. The kitchen goes silent. The refrigerator hums. A car passes on the street outside, its headlights briefly painting the ceiling in a slow, sweeping arc. Then, small footsteps, not from the front of the house, from the side hallway. The one with the door Clara oiled last summer because the hinges used to shriek at midnight when Oliver wandered for water. The door that now opens and closes without making a sound, which means neither of them heard it open. Oliver is standing at the edge of the kitchen in his pajamas, the ones with the small planets on them, the ones with the hole near the left cuff he won't let Clara mend because he says Saturn needs room to breathe. His notebook is pressed against his chest with both arms, the way a soldier holds a shield he isn't sure will be strong enough. His eyes are wide, but they are not confused. He heard everything. He heard enough. Clara sees him first, and the sound she makes. It isn't a gasp. It's smaller than that. It's the sound of a window cracking from the inside. A fracture you can't see until the whole pane falls. Oliver, baby, go back to your room. But Oliver doesn't move. He looks at Eleanor, this woman he's never seen before, standing in his kitchen, wearing a coat the color of storm clouds, telling his mother she isn't enough. Then he walks forward. 3 steps. 4. He stops at the kitchen table, the pine one, and sets his notebook down. He opens it to a page near the middle and turns it so Eleanor can see. The drawing, a tall figure, with no face, broad shoulders. Empty space where the eyes and mouth should be. Beside the figure, a small boy, carefully drawn, meticulously colored, reaching up toward a hand that isn't reaching back. And above them both, a sky so full of stars it looks like the paper itself is bleeding light. Oliver's voice is quiet, not weak, quiet, the way a wire is quiet while it holds weight. You made my mama cry. Eleanor opens her mouth. You're the reason my dad didn't come. The kitchen holds its breath. Eleanor's hand tightens on her handbag. For the first time since she entered this house, she has no prepared sentence, no rehearsed clause, no exit strategy disguised as compassion. An 8-year-old boy just spoke the truest thing anyone has said in this room. And it landed. But to understand how we got to this moment, to a grandmother standing in a kitchen she was never invited into, to a boy holding up a drawing like a verdict, to a mother pressing her back against a wall and refusing to break. We need to go back to 4 o'clock in the morning. Back to a man sitting alone on a darkened porch, turning his dead father's watch over in his hands, listening to the crickets, and being absolutely terrified. Not of the woman inside, not of the boy asleep upstairs, not of the conversation waiting for him at dawn, but of pancakes. We need to go back to the pancakes. Welcome back. If you were here for the introduction, I'm so glad you came back for this. Settle in. Get comfortable. This one goes deeper. And if you're new, if someone sent you this link, or the algorithm brought you here, or you just stumbled in from the cold, you're welcome at this hearth. There's room. There's always room. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I read every single one, and it never stops amazing me how many different places a story can reach when it's told by firelight. Now, if you're just joining us, here's what you need to know. Ethan Blackwood, a man carrying 7 years of silence and a grief he never learned to set down, discovered that he has a son, an 8-year-old boy named Oliver, living in the small town of Millbrook with his mother, Clara. It was Oliver's courage, not Ethan's, that brought them face to face. Oliver saw a stranger at the edge of the park and chose to walk toward him with a notebook full of drawings and a question that had no safe answer. But discovery was the easy part, the collision, the spark. What comes after the spark? That's where the fire either warms you or burns the house down. The confrontation you just witnessed, that grandmother, Eleanor, standing in a kitchen she entered without knocking, reciting details about a child's life like a prosecuting attorney reading evidence into the record. That is what this episode builds toward. But here's the question I want you to sit with. Have you ever watched someone use the truth as a weapon? Not a lie, not a fabrication or an exaggeration, but a fact, ripped from its context, stripped of its warmth, and aimed directly at the people you love. Because Eleanor doesn't lie. That's what makes her dangerous. Every detail she listed about Oliver's life was accurate. Every observation about Clara's limitations was technically, defensibly true. And that's the problem, because the most devastating weapon in any family isn't deception. It's a truth told without love. What Ethan discovers over the next 3 mornings, about Clara, about Oliver, about the mother who raised him and the father whose watch still ticks against his wrist, will test everything he thought he understood about trust, about worthiness, about whether a man who disappeared for 7 years has any right to stand in a kitchen and call himself present. Stay with me. Before we go any further, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and tap the bell. Not because the algorithm demands it, though it does, it's very needy, but because what happens in this story will stay with you long after it ends. I know that's a big promise. I intend to keep it. And if the opening moved you, if you felt something shift in your chest when Oliver walked into that kitchen with his notebook, that like button is right there. It takes half a second, and it tells me you're here, that this matters, that I should keep going, because I'm going to keep going. The sky over Millbrook at 4 in the morning holds no stars. A low ceiling of clouds has rolled in from the west, the kind that sits heavy and close, pressing the darkness down onto rooftops and driveways and the quiet stretch of road where a rented sedan sits parked beneath a streetlight that flickers every 30 seconds like it cannot decide whether it wants to keep working. The car is a mid-range compact, nothing remarkable about it except the faint smell of old coffee trapped in the upholstery and a Pine air freshener dangling from the rearview mirror that stopped being effective somewhere around its 3rd owner. The driver's seat is pushed all the way back to accommodate legs accustomed to the rear cabin of a town car, and the center console holds a gas station. Receipt, a bottle of water purchased at 11:45 the previous night, and a set of keys attached to a rental tag with the number written in blue ink. There is no helicopter this time. No luxury SUV with tinted windows gliding through a town that would notice it immediately. No driver waiting with the engine running. No assistant 3 steps behind with an itinerary and a backup itinerary and a contingency plan for the contingency plan. Between midnight and 4 in the morning, sitting in a hotel room 12 miles outside of Millbrook that cost less per night than the flowers in his Manhattan office lobby, the man who owned 11 hotel properties across 3 continents made a decision that had nothing to do with strategy and everything to do with a boy who likes pancakes. Arriving like a billionaire was the wrong way to show up for his son. The Blackwood name opened doors everywhere it went, but the door that mattered, the one on a quiet street in a town most people couldn't find on a map, that door would only open if the man standing on the other side looked like someone who had come to stay, not someone who had come to acquire. So he drove himself, in a rented sedan that smelled like someone else's commute. And now he sits on Clara's back porch steps in the dark, his elbows on his knees, turning his father's watch over in his hands. The steps are weathered smooth, not from weather, from use. Years of footsteps in the same pattern, the same weight, the same path from door to yard and back again. Someone sanded these steps by hand. He can feel the grooves where a palm pressed down and pushed, where the grain was followed instead of fought. The second step from the bottom has a slight dip on the left side, shaped exactly like the ball of a foot that has stood there 1,000 mornings holding a mug, watching a boy play in the yard. Clara's footprint, pressed into wood. He runs his thumb over the crystal of his father's watch and thinks about that, about the kind of patience it takes to leave your shape in something without meaning to. The thought circling his mind is not about the empire, not about the Blackwood International Board meeting he postponed without explanation, not about the hotel renovation stalled in its 4th city, or the quarterly report his CFO has been trying to get him to review for 6 days, not even about his mother's voice on the phone, those clipped, careful questions about his travel plans that he now understands were never casual, never curious, never the idle interest of a parent checking in. Those questions were surveillance dressed in maternal concern, and the fact that it took him this long to recognize them sits like a stone in the center of his chest. No. The thought circling his mind at 4 in the morning on a porch in a town he didn't know existed 2 weeks ago is this: he doesn't know how to make pancakes. His son likes pancakes. Oliver, 8 years old, quiet, brave in ways that make grown men look like cowards, draws stars in a notebook and eats pancakes on Saturday mornings. And his father, the man whose signature moves currency between countries, whose name is etched into the lobbies of buildings that touch the sky, cannot crack an egg without getting shell in the bowl. He has never sifted flour. He does not own a whisk. He is not entirely certain he could identify a griddle in a lineup. The distance between who he is in a boardroom and who he needs to be in that kitchen when the sun comes up feels like the longest distance he has ever tried to cross, and he has crossed oceans. If you have ever stayed up all night because something mattered too much to sleep, type the word awake in the comments right now, because that is exactly where he is, sitting in the dark, holding a dead man's watch, afraid of breakfast. The side door opens behind him. He doesn't hear it. The hinges make no sound. Clara oiled them last summer because they used to shriek at midnight when Oliver wandered for water, and she needed to be able to hear his footsteps, not the door. So the first thing he registers is not a sound, but a shift, the faint warmth of indoor air meeting the cool dark of the porch, and then the smell of chamomile and honey. Clara stands in the doorway in a faded blue robe, the color washed soft from years of use until it is less blue and more memory of blue. Her hair is loose, no braid tonight, and without it she looks younger in a way that also makes her look more tired, as if the braid is a kind of armor she puts on each morning, and without it, the weight of everything she carries is visible. The shadows under her eyes are deeper than yesterday. She holds the mug with both hands, fingers wrapped tight, not for warmth, but for something to hold on to. She leans against the doorframe the way a person leans against the last wall between two versions of their life, the one where she keeps this man on the porch and the one where she lets him through. You haven't slept. It is not a question. She can see it in the way he holds his shoulders, in the stillness of his hands, in the fact that he is sitting on her steps at 4 in the morning, in clothes he clearly put on hours ago and has been wearing through every doubt and decision since. Since about 3. It's 4:15. I know. She waits. The chamomile steams. Somewhere down the block, a dog barks once and then falls silent, satisfied with its own announcement. He looks down at the watch in his hands, then up at her, and what she sees in his face is not the confidence of a man who runs an empire or the careful composure of someone accustomed to controlling rooms. What she sees is the raw, unguarded fear of a man who has realized that the most important morning of his life is about to begin, and he is not equipped for it. "I don't know how to make pancakes." Something shifts in Clara's expression, not a smile. Something softer than a smile, and sadder than one too. It is the look of a woman who has spent 7 years being the only person in the kitchen, the only person at the school gate, the only person holding the thermometer at 2 in the morning, watching this man, this billionaire whose world runs on competence and precision, admit that he is afraid of flour and eggs and the small ordinary act of feeding his child. It is the look of a wall developing its first crack, not crumbling, not falling, just shifting, just letting a sliver of light through. "I know," she says. She holds his gaze for a long moment. The porch light flickers, the clouds sit low and heavy, and the world is quiet in the particular way that only exists before dawn, when everything is waiting to become something. Then Clara steps back from the doorframe. She moves to the side, and she holds the door open. He stands. His father's watch goes back on his wrist, not in his pocket, not tucked away, but fastened where it belongs, where the ticking sits against his pulse. He walks up the steps, past the groove pressed by her foot, past the threshold she has guarded for 7 years. He walks into her kitchen, and it feels like the most important room he has ever entered. Not because of the chipped countertops or the flour bin with a dented lid sitting on the shelf beside a row of mismatched canisters. Not because of the drawings held to the refrigerator with magnets shaped like animals, a giraffe, a whale, a small red fox. Not because the window above the sink looks out onto a yard where a tire swing hangs motionless from an oak tree in the grey pre-dawn light. Because she let him in through the front of her life. Not through a midnight confrontation on a darkened porch, not through a child's desperate courage in a park. Through a door held open on purpose, by a woman who had every reason to keep it shut, with chamomile cooling in her hands and a look on her face that said she hadn't decided yet whether this was brave or foolish, but she was doing it anyway. And somewhere upstairs, their son sleeps with a notebook under his pillow, dreaming of stars he drew himself, not yet knowing that this morning, this one small, ordinary, terrifying morning, his father is going to try to make him pancakes. The kitchen tells its own story before anyone speaks a word in it. The air holds cinnamon and the warm, yeasty breath of dough that has been rising since before dawn. Trays of rolls lined along the counter beneath damp towels, their tops swelling slowly in the heat that radiates from the oven as it ticks through its preheat cycle. This is a kitchen that works for a living. Every surface carries the record of hands that have been busy here for years, and not the hands of a chef hired to prepare meals for a man who eats at restaurants where the bill arrives in a leather folio. These are the hands of a woman who bakes bread to sell at the weekend market because the teaching assistant's salary covers rent and electricity, but not always both in the same month. The cutting board next to the stove is thick maple, its surface cross-hatched with so many knife marks it looks like a topographic map of some weathered landscape. 10,000 loaves have been sliced on that board, 10,000 mornings of measuring and kneading and waiting and pulling something warm from the oven, while a small boy sat at the table with his notebook, drawing stars between bites. Near the back left burner, the countertop carries a dark oval, a burn mark where a pot was set down too hot during some late night that demanded soup and speed and no time to reach for a trivet. And in the cracks between the old tile floor, there is flour, fine and white, and settled so deeply into the grout that no amount of sweeping will ever fully remove it. It sits in those cracks like snow that fell indoors and decided to stay. Clara's kitchen is not decorated. It is inhabited. It is lived in the way a body is lived in, marked by every meal, every early morning, every small emergency handled alone. Clara sets the ingredients on the counter beside the stove with the quiet efficiency of someone who has performed this particular sequence hundreds of times. Flour, sugar, baking powder, salt, a carton of eggs, milk from the refrigerator, whole, not 2% because Oliver can. Taste the difference and has opinions about it. And from the freezer, a bag of blueberries, frozen, Not the pint of fresh ones sitting on the second shelf behind the yogurt. Frozen, not fresh, she says, setting the bag on the counter, where it immediately begins to form a ring of condensation on the tile. He says fresh ones are too squishy. They burst when you mix them in and turn everything purple. Frozen ones hold their shape and stay cold in the middle. He likes the cold spots. The man standing at her counter, the man whose corporate portfolio includes a villa on the Italian coast and a penthouse that overlooks Central Park from a height, where the trees look like moss on a stone, files this information with the same focus and precision he would give to a merger brief. Frozen blueberries, not fresh, cold spots in the middle. He does not write it down because he will not forget it. He will never forget it. This is the first concrete thing he has learned about his son's preferences from the mouth of his son's mother, and it lands in his chest like something that has weight and temperature. Clara does not offer to help. She pours her tea, chamomile, the same cup from the porch, now lukewarm, and carries it to the kitchen table. The table sits slightly uneven on the old tile floor, its back left leg shorter than the others, by perhaps half an inch, and wedged beneath that leg is a piece of folded cardboard, creased and soft from months of bearing the table's weight. She pulls out a chair, sits down and watches him. Her hands wrap around the mug. Her eyes are steady. She is giving him the counter and the stove and the ingredients and the space to try, and she is not going to stand beside him and guide his hands. This is not a cooking lesson. This is an audition, and the director is sitting at a wobbly table with shadows under her eyes, deciding whether to let the performance continue. He picks up the first egg. He has seen eggs cracked in kitchens before, in hotel kitchens where chefs moved with the speed and certainty of people who had done this 10,000 times. One clean tap against the rim of the bowl, a slight pull with both thumbs, the contents dropping cleanly into the vessel below. It looked effortless. It is not effortless. He brings the egg down against the rim of Clara's mixing bowl with too much force, and the shell doesn't just crack, it collapses. Fragments scatter across the surface of the flour like tiny broken teeth, and the yolk slides through his fingers and drops into the bowl, trailing a comet's tail of white and shell pieces. He stares at it. In a boardroom, when something goes wrong, there are protocols, contingency plans, assistants who materialize with solutions before the problem fully forms. Here, there is a bowl of flour with shell fragments in it, and the only assistant is a woman at a table who is watching him with an expression he cannot read. He picks up the second egg, adjusts his grip, taps it lighter this time, but not light enough, or perhaps at the wrong angle, because the crack runs jagged across the shell, and when he pulls it apart, 3 sharp fragments drop into the bowl to join their predecessors. He fishes one out with his fingertip, then another. The third one evades him, sliding beneath the surface of the flour, like something that does not want to be found. The third egg fares slightly better. The crack is cleaner, the separation more controlled, and only 2 small pieces of shell fall into the bowl. He reaches in to retrieve them and realizes he needs a spoon, something small enough to scoop a fragment of shell from a bowl of dry ingredients without disturbing everything around it. But he does not know where the spoons are. The drawers line the counter to his left, 4 of them brass handles, each one a mystery. He could open them. It would take 5 seconds, but opening every drawer in a woman's kitchen while she watches from the table feels uncomfortably like surveying a property for acquisition, cataloging assets, taking inventory of a space that does not belong to him. His hand hovers over the first drawer pull, hesitates. "Second drawer on the left," Clara says quietly. She is not looking at his hand. She is looking at his face. She read the hesitation before it fully formed, the way it moved across his features like weather crossing a field, and she answered it without being asked, not to help him, to show him that she sees what he is doing. She sees the effort behind the restraint. She knows. He opens the second drawer on the left, finds a small spoon, retrieves the shell fragments one by one, holding each up to the light from the window above the sink to make sure it is shell and not a clump of flour. Then he adds the milk, stirs. The batter is lumpy, thick in some places, thin in others, with pockets of dry flour clinging to the sides of the bowl like small white islands. He keeps stirring. Faster. working the whisk in tight circles because the lumps feel like failures and he wants them gone, wants the batter smooth and uniform, wants something in this kitchen to look like competence. You're over-mixing. Clara's voice comes from the table, calm and direct. Pancake batter is supposed to be lumpy. If you make it smooth, the pancakes come out tough. You have to leave the imperfections in. That's what makes them tender. He stops stirring, looks down at the batter, then at her. And there is something in her voice when she says that, leave the imperfections in, that's what makes them tender, that he understands is not entirely about pancakes. The language of what Clara knows could fill every room in every hotel he has ever owned. She knows he cannot cook. She knows he overmixes. She knows that Oliver prefers frozen blueberries and the left swing and the second bench from the fountain. She knows every bedtime fear, every growing pain, every nightmare that required a glass of water and a hand on a small forehead in the dark. She knows 7 years of everything he missed, not 5, 7, because she carried Oliver alone from the very beginning, from the moment she knew, through every morning and every fever, and every first day of school where other children arrived holding 2 hands and Oliver arrived holding 1. She carries all of that knowledge the way a person carries a bag they packed for a short trip that turned into a life, shifting it from shoulder to shoulder, never setting it down because there was never anyone to hand it to. He sets the whisk in the bowl, turns to the stove. The burner has been on since he started. Clara told him to heat the pan before mixing, and he did, but the dial is turned too high. The cast-iron skillet sitting on the front burner is already smoking faintly, a thin haze rising from its dark surface. He pours a circle of batter into the center of the pan, and it hits the iron with a hiss that sounds like accusation. 40 seconds. That is all it takes. The bottom of the first pancake goes from golden to brown to black in less time than it takes to have a thought about it, and then the smoke alarm on the ceiling above the stove begins to shriek. A flat, insistent electronic scream that fills the kitchen the way only a smoke detector in a small house can, occupying every corner, bouncing off every surface, making the walls themselves feel like they are protesting. He grabs a dish towel from the counter and waves it beneath the detector, fanning the smoke, the burnt disc in the pan now curling at its edges like a document someone tried to burn. Clara stands from the table without urgency. She moves with the particular calm of someone who has responded to this exact alarm in this exact kitchen enough times that it no longer registers as an emergency. She reaches up and presses the reset button on the detector with the flat of her palm. One press. The shrieking stops. She is tall enough to reach it without stretching. She has done this before. Oliver sets it off at least once a month, she says, sitting back down. He tries to make toast and forgets about it, gets distracted drawing. I find him at the table with his notebook while the bread turns into charcoal. He is still holding the dish towel. The burnt pancake is still smoking in the pan. And what stops him, what makes his hand go still, is not the failure but the sentence before it. He makes his own toast? Clara points to the corner of the kitchen nearest the counter, and he follows her gesture to a small wooden step stool painted blue. The blue is chipped in places, showing the bare wood beneath, and across the top surface, scratched into the paint with something sharp, a nail maybe, or the tip of a butter knife, are 5 letters in wobbly, uneven strokes. Oliver's name, written by a hand that was still learning how to hold things steady, written by a boy who was old, enough to climb onto a stool and reach the counter, but young enough that his letters still wandered off the line. He's been helping me in the kitchen since he could stand on that stool, Clara says. Stirring batter, measuring flour, learning to crack eggs. He was better at it than you by the time he was 6, for what it's worth. She takes a sip of her tea. He's better at flipping pancakes than most adults I've met. If you believe second chances are worth fighting for, type the word closer in the comments. He stares at the stool, at the scratched letters, at the chipped blue paint that was once bright, and is now the color of something loved past its original condition. He is looking at the evidence of 7 years of mornings he should have been part of. 7 years of a boy climbing onto this stool, reaching for a mixing bowl, learning the things a kitchen teaches you when someone patient stands beside you and lets you try. 7 years of flour in the cracks and burnt toast, and a smoke alarm that shrieks once a month because an 8-year-old gets lost in his drawings while the bread turns to carbon. 7 years of a mother who sanded the porch steps and oiled the hinges and propped the table with cardboard and painted a stool blue and let her son scratch his name into it because a child's mark on a thing makes it his, makes it home, makes it proof that he exists in a space where someone wanted him enough to let him leave evidence. He turns back to the stove, scrapes the burnt pancake into the trash. It goes without protest, too far gone to cling to the pan. He turns the dial down, 1 full notch below where it was, pours another circle of batter, smaller this time, into the center of the reheated skillet. The batter sits there. It does not hiss. It does not sizzle. It does nothing at all. Just spreads slowly into an uneven oval and lies still on the iron surface like something waiting to be convinced. He watches it for 30 seconds, a minute. The edges are not setting. The surface is not forming bubbles. When he slides the spatula beneath it and turns it over, one side is barely colored, a pale anemic beige, and the center is still wet, raw batter pooling in the middle of a pancake that is not a pancake but a warm puddle pretending to be one. Clara leans forward in her chair. She looks at the pale disk in the pan. She looks at the dial on the stove. She looks at the man standing in her kitchen with a spatula in one hand, and the accumulated evidence of everything he does not know how to do spread out across her counter like a confession. "Closer," she says. Oliver appears at 6:32 in the morning. Not 6:30, not 6:35, 6:32. And the only reason that number matters, the only reason it will stay lodged in the memory of the man standing at the stove for the rest of his life, is because he checks his father's watch the moment the footsteps begin on the stairs. Not from impatience, not from anxiety about whether the boy will come down, whether this fragile new arrangement will survive the transition from night to day. He checks the watch because he wants to remember. He spent 7 years not knowing about Oliver's existence, not knowing about the mornings, not knowing about any of it. And now that he is here, standing in this kitchen with flour on his shirt and a failed pancake cooling on a plate behind him, he has decided that he will remember everything, every detail, every timestamp, every second that he is given in this house. He will hold with the same care Clara uses when she smooths the sleep from Oliver's hair. The boy rounds the corner from the hallway and stops in the kitchen doorway. He is wearing the planet pajamas, not the rocket ones from the drawer, but the ones with small planets orbiting across faded cotton, the ones with the hole near the left cuff that he will not let his mother mend because Saturn needs room to breathe. His hair stands up on one side in a rooster tail that defies every law of gravity and grooming, pressed flat against his skull on the other side from the pillow. His notebook is tucked under his left arm, held against his ribs the way he always holds it, and his feet are bare on the cold kitchen tile. He sees the man at the stove, the man who was a stranger at the park 3 days ago, the man who became a father in the space between one sentence and the next, and the word that comes out of his mouth, quiet, still new, still being tested like a tooth that has just grown in, lands in the kitchen the way a stone lands in still water. "Dad?" It hits the man at the stove in the center of his chest, not because it is unexpected. Oliver said it yesterday too, and the day before that, each time with a slightly different inflection, as if he is turning the word over in his mouth to see how it fits from different angles. It hits because every time Oliver says it, a door opens, a door into a room that this man, this billionaire who has keys to every building he owns, who carries access cards and security codes and the kind of wealth that unlocks anything with a lock, thought he had lost the key to permanently. And every time that door opens, the room behind it is larger than he expected. Warmer, more terrifying in its warmth. "Hey, buddy." His voice comes out rough. He clears his throat, adjusts his grip on the spatula. "I'm making pancakes." Oliver crosses the kitchen with the unhurried confidence of a boy who knows every tile, every cabinet, every squeaky floorboard in this house. He stops beside the stove and rises on his toes to peer into the cast-iron skillet where the latest attempt sits, a pale, misshapen circle with an edge that has folded over on itself, like a page being turned in a book no one wants to read. Then his eyes travel to the plate on the counter behind the stove, where the previous attempts are displayed in a lineup that tells the complete story of the morning so far. One burned black, its edges curled and carbonized into something that belongs in a geology exhibit, not on a breakfast table. One raw in the center, its pallid surface still glistening with uncooked batter, and one that somehow folded in half during the flip, trapping a pocket of raw dough inside a golden exterior, looking for all the world like a sad, defeated taco that has given up on its purpose. Oliver studies this collection with the seriousness of a gallery visitor considering a difficult exhibition. He does not laugh. He does not wrinkle his nose. He looks at each failed pancake the way his mother looked at the man on her porch at 4 a.m, with assessment, with understanding, with something that is making a decision. Do you want help? There is no pity in his voice. None. And this is what breaks the moment open and makes it something holy, something that a man who has sat in boardrooms on 4 continents and negotiated deals worth more than some countries' annual budgets will carry for the rest of his natural life. Oliver does not offer help the way an adult offers help, with implied superiority, with the subtle communication that the person being helped has failed. He offers it the way a boy offers it who has spent years standing on a blue stool beside his mother, learning that cooking is patient work, that teaching is gentle work, that the person beside you at the stove is someone you stand with, not above. Clara taught him that. Clara, who sat at the table and watched a billionaire destroy 3 eggs and burn a pancake and nearly melt a spatula, and never once took the tools from his hands. She taught her son that helping is not rescuing. It is standing beside. Yeah. The word comes out thick. He swallows. Tries again. Yeah, I really do. Oliver turns and walks to the corner where the blue stool sits. He grips it by the top, his small fingers fitting into the same grooves they have pressed into the paint over years of use, and drags it across the tile floor toward the stove. The sound it makes, a scraping, stuttering drag of wooden legs on ceramic, fills the kitchen, and at the table, Clara's fingers tighten around her mug. She has heard this sound 1,000 times. 1,000 mornings of that stool being dragged across that floor to that counter, of small hands reaching for measuring cups and wooden spoons, of a boy learning to feed himself because his mother taught him that independence is a form of love. She has heard this sound so many times it is part of the house itself, part of the architecture of her life. But she has never heard it in this context, the stool being dragged not toward her, but toward him, toward the father. Toward the man at the stove who does not know what he is doing, and admitted it, and stayed anyway. Oliver climbs onto the stool. His feet find the top with the sureness of a body that knows its platforms, and suddenly he is counter-height, shoulder to shoulder with a man who is 6'2" and worth more than the GDP of a small island nation. He reaches for the spatula with a hand that is confident and calm and utterly without hesitation, and the man beside him lets it go. Lets it go the way you let go of control when you finally understand that control was never the thing you needed. You have to wait for the bubbles, Oliver says. He is watching the pan with the focus of a surgeon and the patience of a monk. The batter sits on the iron surface, poured by hands that are learning, spread unevenly, dotted with frozen blueberries that are beginning to bleed purple at their edges. See, right there. He points with his free hand. When the little bubbles pop on top and don't fill back in, when you can see the holes stay open, that's when you flip, not before. If you flip before the bubbles, the middle is raw. If you wait too long after, the bottom burns. He demonstrates. One fluid movement. Spatula beneath the pancake's edge. A slight lift to check the color. Then the wrist flick that sends the pancake into a half turn in the air before it lands back on the iron, golden side up. Perfect. Golden brown. Even edges. Blueberries showing through the surface like small jewels set into bread. The pancake sits on the skillet with the satisfied stillness of a thing that has been made correctly, and Oliver regards it with the quiet pride of someone who knows he is good at this and does not need anyone else to confirm it. "Mama taught me," he says. Then he looks up at the man beside him. Up, because even standing on the stool he is still shorter, still small, still 8 years old with sleep in his eyes and a rooster tail in his hair, and his face breaks into a grin that carries no weight, no grief, no awareness of what it costs the man receiving it. Now I'm teaching you. Every perfect pancake Oliver flips on that griddle is a monument, not to failure, not to what went wrong or who is to blame or the 7 years of silence that sit between this man and this boy, like an ocean neither of them put there. Every golden disc that slides from the spatula onto the growing stack is a monument to a morning routine that happened without him. Every confident movement of Oliver's small hands, the way he tilts the bowl to pour, the way he taps the spatula twice against the pan's edge after flipping, the way he reaches for the bag of frozen blueberries and drops exactly 4 into each circle of batter because 4 is the right number, Mama said so, is proof. Proof of Clara's patience, Clara's teaching, Clara's years of showing up alone at 5 in the morning to start the dough, alone at 6:30 to heat the griddle, alone at the table to watch her son learn the language of a kitchen that should have had 2 voices in it and only ever had 1. At the table, Clara sits with her arms crossed over her chest and her tea forgotten beside her, cooling past the point of being worth drinking. She is watching them, the man and the boy at the stove, the broad shoulders and the narrow ones, the large hands learning and the small hands teaching. She is fighting something, her lips pressed together so tightly the color leaves them, her jaw set in the particular way it sets when she is determined not to feel something she is already feeling. But her eyes betray her. They soften at the corners. The guard she keeps behind them, the careful, constructed wall that has protected her and Oliver for years, develops a fracture so fine it is almost invisible. Almost. She does not want him to see how much this moment means. She does not want him to know that watching her son teach his father to flip a pancake is doing something to her chest that she does not have a name for, something that is both warm and painful, like pressing on a bruise that you didn't know was still there. But he sees, through the flour dust hanging in the morning light that has finally begun to filter through the window above the sink, through the steam rising from the griddle in soft curls, through 7 years of distance and silence and all the mornings he was not here, he sees her fighting. He sees her losing. He sees the crack. She looks away first, picks up her tea, brings it to her lips and pretends to drink, but the mug is cold and the chamomile is flat, and they both know she is not tasting anything. By 7:15, the stack is complete. 12 pancakes, golden and blue speckled and steaming, arranged on a plate that Oliver carried to the table himself, walking carefully across the kitchen with both hands on the rim like a boy delivering something precious. Beside the tower of 12, set slightly apart on a smaller plate, sit 2 additional pancakes, unevenly shaped, one slightly too dark on the left side, one with a bubble crater in the center that gives it the appearance of a small lunar landscape, made by hands that are learning. Oliver placed them on the separate plate deliberately, not to shame, to honor. "Those are Dad's," he announced to the kitchen, to his mother, to the morning itself, and the man who made them felt something shift behind his ribs that he will spend years trying to name. They eat at the wobbly table with the cardboard wedge beneath its leg. Oliver sits in his usual chair, the one closest to the window, the one with the cushion tied to the seat because the wooden surface is too hard for a boy who eats slowly. Clara sits across from him, and the man sits in the chair that has no cushion, the chair that has been empty every morning for 8 years, the chair that Clara has never moved or removed or replaced because some absences are easier to leave standing than to fill. Oliver talks without stopping, between bites of pancake and gulps of milk that leave a white mustache on his upper lip. He talks about his teacher, the way she reads aloud after lunch, with different voices for every character, the way she keeps a jar of colored pencils on her desk that anyone can borrow but you have to return them sharp. He talks about a constellation book he found at the library, how it shows the summer sky and the winter sky on different pages, and if you hold them up to the light you can see them overlap, and did his dad know that some stars are already dead but their light hasn't stopped traveling yet, so when you look up, you're seeing something that doesn't exist anymore but is still beautiful. He talks about the robin building a nest in the gutter above the bakery door on the street where Clara's friend sells bread, the small brown bird who has been working on the same nest for a week and keeps dropping sticks. "She keeps dropping them," Oliver says, his fork pausing mid-air, a piece of blueberry pancake speared on its tines. "She flies up with a stick and puts it in the gutter, and then the wind knocks it out and it falls on the sidewalk, and then she flies down and picks it back up and takes it back to the same spot, over and over. He chews, swallows. Mama says that's what brave looks like. Clara's hand finds Oliver's hair. She reaches across the corner of the table and smooths the rooster tail on the right side of his head, her palm pressing gently against the strands that spring back up the moment she lifts her hand. The gesture is easy, practiced, automatic. The gesture of a hand that has smoothed that hair every morning for 8 years, that knows the exact pressure and direction and rhythm required, that could do this in the dark, in her sleep, from the far side of any room. "That's right, my brave boy," she says quietly, and her voice holds the warmth she would not let her face show. The man across the table watches this gesture, the reach, the smooth, the spring back of the hair, the words that follow, and commits every fraction of it to memory. The angle of her wrist, the way her fingers spread, the softness that enters her voice when she speaks to Oliver, a softness she does not use with anyone else, a softness that is reserved and protected and given only to the boy who earned it by existing. He watches the way a man watches who is studying a language he desperately needs to learn. Not the language of words, he speaks 5 of those. The language of mornings, the language of a hand in a child's hair, the language of showing up so many times that the gesture becomes part of your body, part of your breath, part of who you are. He does not speak this language yet. But he is sitting at the table. He is eating the pancakes. He is listening. If this moment between father and son touched something in your heart, go ahead and hit that like button right now. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this story today. And if you are not subscribed yet, now is the time, because what is coming next will change everything you think you know about this family. After breakfast, after the plates are cleared, and the skillet is soaked in the sink, and the last traces of flour are wiped from the counter, though not from the cracks in the floor, never from the cracks in the floor, Oliver takes his father's hand. He does it without announcement, without ceremony, without the self-consciousness that an older child might carry into such a gesture. He simply reaches up and wraps his fingers around 3 of the man's fingers, because his hand is not yet large enough to take the whole thing, and he pulls. The direction is the hallway. The destination is upstairs. The purpose, as far as Oliver is concerned, is obvious. His father has seen the kitchen, and now it is time to see everything else. The tour begins in Oliver's bedroom, and the first thing that registers is the color. The walls are blue. Not the blue of expensive paint selected from a fan deck by an interior designer, not the precise controlled blue of the accent walls in any of the Blackwood hotel suites, but a blue that was chosen by a woman standing in the hardware store aisle with a boy on her hip, pointing at a color card and saying, "That one." Clara painted these walls herself. The evidence is everywhere if you know where to look, and the man standing in the doorway is learning to look. Near the ceiling where the wall meets the trim, the brushstrokes are visible, long, stretching strokes that thin out at their edges, places where the roller couldn't reach and a brush took over, guided by a hand that was extended as high as it could go, up on tiptoes, pressing against the limit of her own height. The paint went thin in those spots. You can see the primer bleeding through in pale streaks, like the effort itself left a mark on the surface. She didn't go back to fix it. Maybe she ran out of paint. Maybe Oliver was crying in the next room, and she set the brush down and never picked it back up. Either way, the imperfection stayed, and now it is part of the room, part of the record. Oliver leads him to the center of the room, and then points up. "You have to look at the ceiling," he says, with the authority of a curator about to reveal the gallery's most important piece. 47 glow-in-the-dark stars are pressed to the ceiling above the bed. They are arranged not randomly, not scattered the way a child might throw them, but deliberately, in clusters and lines that follow a pattern. "That one's Orion," Oliver says, pointing to a group of stars near the far wall. "See the belt? 3 in a row. And that one over there is the Big Dipper. You can find it because it looks like a pot with a bent handle." His finger traces the shape in the air, connecting points that his father cannot yet distinguish but follows anyway, trusting the boy's map. "And that one?" Oliver points to a single star near the center of the ceiling, slightly off its intended position, tilted about 15 degrees to the left of where it should sit in the constellation it belongs to. That one's crooked because I sneezed when I was sticking it up. The man standing in his son's bedroom looks at that crooked star, that small phosphorescent disc pressed into the plaster by a boy who was reaching as high as he could. Standing on the bed his mother told him not to jump on, mapping the sky onto his ceiling from a book he checked out of the library, and then a sneeze came, and his hand slipped, and the star landed where it landed. The most beautiful imperfection he has ever seen. More beautiful than the hand-blown glass chandeliers in the Blackwood Grand Lobby. More beautiful than the original artwork on the walls of his penthouse. More beautiful than anything money has ever purchased or power has ever acquired. Because this crooked star was placed by hands that were small and sure and reaching, and the sneeze that knocked it off course is part of its story. And stories are the only things in this world that money cannot buy. The bookshelf against the far wall is overflowing in the specific way that bookshelves overflow when a child reads faster than the shelf can accommodate. Books are stacked horizontally on top of vertical ones, crammed into every available gap, spines cracked from rereading, library stickers peeling from the lower corners. A space encyclopedia with a torn cover sits at the end of the top shelf, its binding held together with tape that has yellowed and curled but still holds. Still doing its job long past the point where most adhesives would have surrendered. Beside it, a field guide to birds. Below it, 3 novels stacked with a bookmark, a torn strip of notebook paper, sticking out from each one, because Oliver reads multiple books at once and keeps his place in all of them, a habit Clara says he developed. When he was 6 and realized that some books are for morning, and some are for night, and some are for the 20 minutes between school and dinner, when the light through his window hits the bed at exactly the right angle. The drawings are pinned everywhere, not framed, pinned, thumbtacks and tape, and in one case, a piece of chewing gum that has hardened into a grey pearl against the blue wall. Trees rendered in coloured pencil with root systems that extend below the ground line because Oliver believes you should draw what you cannot see as well as what you can. The bakery on the corner where Clara's friend sells bread, drawn from the sidewalk perspective with the awning and the display window, and the small bell above the door that Oliver included as a yellow circle, because he couldn't figure out how to draw a sound. The river that runs behind the park, its surface captured in overlapping blue lines that move if you look at them long enough. And between these, between the trees and the buildings and the landscapes of a boy's daily world, like a heartbeat that shows up on every page, on every wall, in every corner of this room, a tall figure standing beside a small boy. The tall figure has no face. Oliver opens the closet. The clothes are pushed to one side, shirts and jackets, and a winter coat that is slightly too short in the sleeves, evidence of a boy who grew faster than the budget could follow. The other side of the closet floor, the bottom half, is stacked with notebooks, dozens of them. Composition books with marbled covers in different colors, spiral notebooks with bent wire bindings, cheap drugstore sketch pads with cardboard backs that have softened from handling. They are stacked in approximate chronological order, the oldest at the bottom, the newest at the top, and Oliver begins pulling them out one by one and handing them to his father, who lowers himself to the floor, cross-legged on. The braided rug beside the bed, a rug that cost $12 and has more warmth in its fraying threads than the Persian carpet in his Manhattan study, and receives each notebook the way a person receives something irreplaceable, with both hands, with held breath, with the growing understanding that what is being handed to him is not paper and ink, but years. If you have ever waited for someone who did not know you were waiting, type the word waiting in the comments right now. Oliver drew his father every single day. That kind of hope deserves to be seen. The oldest notebook is barely recognizable as the work of the same boy. The pages are filled with a toddler's marks, circles and lines and shapeless masses of color applied with the full-fisted grip of a hand that has not yet learned to hold a crayon properly. But even here, even in the earliest pages, where the drawings are more gesture than image, more feeling than form, there are 2 figures. One small, a round head, stick limbs, a body that is mostly a circle with legs, and beside it, one tall, larger, reaching toward the top of the page. The tall one has no face, no eyes, no mouth, no features at all, just the shape, the outline, the space where a person should be. He turns the pages. moves to the next notebook, and the next. The drawings improve year by year, the way a river cuts deeper into the same channel, the same subject, the same composition, but rendered with increasing skill and specificity. The faceless figure gains shoulders first, then hands. 5 fingers spread wide on each hand, because Oliver learned to count fingers before he learned to shade them. Then shoes, 2 rectangles at the bottom, carefully colored in. Then a jacket. Then height. Real height. The proportions stretching as Oliver's understanding of how bodies occupy space grew more sophisticated. Everything except the face. Everything except eyes and a mouth, and the features that would make the tall figure real, that would transform him from a shape into a person, from a wish into a father. The face stays blank. Year after year after year, the face stays blank. And the blankness is not an absence of skill. It is an absence of information. Oliver did not know what his father looked like. He drew everything he could imagine, and left empty the one thing he could not. One drawing from last year stops the man on the braided rug. The tall figure, detailed now, rendered with care that speaks of hours spent, is holding the small figure's hand, not reaching for it, not almost touching, holding it. Their fingers are interlocked, drawn with the painstaking attention of a boy who thought about what it would feel like to have his hand held by someone he had never met. Beneath the drawing, in careful block printing that follows a penciled guideline, Oliver drew first and then erased, the ghost of the guideline still visible beneath the letters. 2 words, my dad. The man on the braided rug goes quiet. Not the quiet of a person who has run out of things to say, but the quiet of a person who has been filled past the point of language. The notebooks surround him on the floor, open, stacked, spread across the rug like a paper archaeology of his son's longing. Years of it, not loud longing, not the kind that demands or accuses or breaks things. Patient longing, faithful longing. The kind that sits down every day at a small desk in a blue room and picks up a pencil and draws the same figure and leaves the same face blank and believes without evidence, without encouragement, without a single phone call or letter or visit to justify the belief that someday the blank space will be filled, that someday the tall figure will become real, that someday the father will come. Are you okay, Dad? Oliver's voice comes from beside him. Close. The boy has moved from the closet to the rug without the man noticing, and he sits now at his father's side, his shoulder pressed against the man's upper arm because he is small for his age. Clara mentioned this once, casually, the way she mentions things that worry her without admitting they worry her, and his shoulder only reaches that high. He is looking up at his father's face with an expression that carries concern but not alarm, curiosity but not fear. He has seen adults cry before. His mother cries sometimes in the kitchen after she thinks he is asleep. He knows what it looks like when someone's eyes fill and their jaw tightens and their breathing changes. He is not frightened by it. He is simply asking. The man presses his thumb against the scratched crystal of his father's watch, the watch that belonged to a man who also left a blank space, who died before certain conversations could happen, before certain truths could be spoken, before a son could ask his father the questions that are now pressing against the inside of his chest like water behind a dam. The crystal is scratched because his father wore it every day, wore it working, wore it living, wore it until it carried the evidence of a life fully occupied. He presses his thumb against those scratches and holds on. I just need a minute. Oliver nods. He does not say okay. He does not say take your time. He does not fidget or reach for his notebook or look toward the door. He simply sits, shoulder to arm, breathing, present, a boy who understands waiting the way some people understand mathematics or music. Intuitively, fundamentally, as a core competence, developed not through instruction, but through necessity. He was good at waiting. He had had 7 years of practice. Clara returns from walking Oliver to school at 8:15 in the morning. The kitchen door opens and closes with the quiet click of a woman who has learned to move through her house without disturbing the air, a habit developed during years of nap schedules and early bedtimes, and a child who slept lightly and woke at the smallest sound. She hangs her keys on the hook beside the door, the same hook she has used every morning for 8 years, and turns to find the man at her kitchen table. He is not the same man who arrived by helicopter 3 days ago. That man wore clothes that cost more than her monthly rent and carried himself with the particular posture of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room he entered. That man's hands were clean and manicured and had never touched a mixing bowl or a cast-iron skillet or the scratched surface of a composition notebook filled with a child's drawings. That man existed in a world of assistants and drivers and problems that other people solved before he even knew they existed. The man at her kitchen table has his sleeves rolled to the elbow. There is flour on his forearm, a white smear that runs from wrist to mid-forearm, pressed into the hair there, evidence of the morning's work. His collar is unbuttoned. His hair, usually precise in its styling, has a slight disorder to it, a piece falling across his forehead that he has not bothered to push back. And on the table in front of him, stacked with the careful alignment of documents being reviewed before a critical meeting, are the notebooks, Oliver's notebooks, the composition books and spiral pads and drugstore sketch pads that contain 7 years of drawings, 7 years of a faceless figure standing beside a small boy, 7 years of patient and faithful longing recorded in pencil and crayon and ink. He has not moved since she left to walk Oliver to school. He has sat at this wobbly table with its cardboard wedge and its pine surface and its view of the yard, where the tire swing hangs motionless. And he has looked at the notebooks, and he has looked at his father's watch, and he has tried to understand how to carry the weight of what he now knows. Clara crosses to the coffee maker. The pot is still warm from the batch she made before breakfast, and she pours 2 cups without asking whether he wants one. She sets 1 cup in front of him, placing it on the table with the particular care of someone who knows exactly where the wobble is and how to avoid triggering it, and carries the other to the chair across from him. When she sits, the table shifts slightly to the left, and her foot moves automatically beneath her chair, pressing against the cardboard wedge, steadying it. She has done this 1,000 times. The motion is so integrated into her body that she no longer notices she is doing it. The silence between them holds for a moment. 2 people at a table that has seen 1,000 breakfasts, 1,000 mornings, 1,000 small negotiations between a mother and a boy, learning to become a person. 2 people with a history that includes a summer 7 years ago, and a departure, and a child who was never mentioned, and never explained, and never given the chance to exist in the space between them. But they do not talk about the past, not the helicopter or the money or the lies or the years. Not the questions that have been circling like birds waiting to land. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you look for her? Why didn't I know? Those questions exist. They will have to be answered eventually. But not now. Not this morning. This morning, the only subject that matters is the boy who walked to school with his notebook under his arm, counting his steps from the front door to the corner, because counting is what Oliver does when the world feels too large, and he needs to make it smaller. Navy blue, Clara says. She wraps her hands around her coffee cup and looks at him across the notebooks. His favorite color, not sky blue, he's very specific about that. Navy. He says it's the color of space when you're far from any star, the dark between the constellations. He thinks that's where the real mystery is, not in the stars themselves, but in the space that holds them apart. The man across from her does not speak. He listens the way a person listens who understands that what is being given to him is not small talk or casual information, but coordinates, a map. Every detail Clara shares is a road into her son's heart, a path that she has walked alone for 8 years and is now, carefully, tentatively, allowing someone else to see. He's been afraid of thunderstorms since he was 3, the first big one we had after we moved here. The power went out and the windows were rattling, and he screamed so loud I thought. Something was wrong. Something was really wrong. Not just fear, but injury. I ran into his room, and he was standing in the middle of the floor with his hands over his ears and his eyes squeezed shut. She pauses, takes a sip of coffee that she does not taste. Now when it storms, he crawls into my bed. We count the seconds between the lightning and the thunder. He learned that somewhere, that you can tell how far away a storm is by counting. If he can count past 5, he knows the storm is moving away, so he counts. He always counts. He counts a lot, the man says quietly. It is not a question. He has noticed. In the short time he has spent with Oliver, at the park, at the kitchen table, in the blue bedroom with the glow-in-the-dark stars, he has noticed the counting. Steps on the sidewalk, stars on the ceiling, blueberries in each pancake. It's his way of making the world feel smaller, safer. When things get too big, too loud, too uncertain, too much, he counts steps, stars, ceiling tiles, days. Clara's voice shifts on the last word. Something enters it that was not there before, something that sits closer to the surface, closer to breaking through. He counted the days since you came to Millbrook. He told me this morning while he was tying his shoes. 3 days. He's been counting. Trust is not built in a single grand gesture. It is earned one morning at a time. If that hits home for you, type "show up" in the comments below. The man at the table looks down at his coffee, at the notebooks stacked beside it, at the watch on his wrist with its scratched crystal, its steady ticking, its record of his father's life and his father's death, and all the things that were never said between them. 3 days. Oliver has been counting 3 days the way other children count down to birthdays or holidays, marking time, making it visible, turning the abstract passage of hours into something he can hold. He doesn't need a billionaire, Clara says. Her voice is steady now, the brakes smoothed over, the surface calm even if the current beneath it runs fast and cold. The money, the empire, the hotels, all of it, that's not what he's looking for. He's looking for someone who shows up, who stays when the pancakes burn, who's there when the thunder comes at 2 in the morning and he needs someone to count with him. She meets his eyes across the table, and in her gaze there is both an offer and a warning. A door held open and a hand on the frame, ready to close it. He needs someone who keeps being there, not once, not for a visit, for the long version, for the mornings that don't have anything special in them, for the ordinary days when nothing remarkable happens and you show up anyway. I'm here. The words come out before he can weigh them, before he can calculate their cost or measure their promise against his ability to keep it. They come from somewhere beneath strategy, beneath the careful thinking that has guided every significant decision of his adult life. They come from the same place the burned pancakes came from, the same place that made him trade the helicopter for a rented sedan that smelled like pine air freshener and old coffee. Clara does not smile, does not soften. Her hands remain wrapped around her cup, her posture remains upright in the chair, her foot remains pressed against the cardboard wedge beneath the table. You were here 7 years ago too. The words land between them like a stone dropped into water that only appeared still. The ripples move outward, through the breakfast dishes still sitting in the sink, through the flour on his sleeves that he has not washed off, through the pile of notebooks with their faceless figures and their patient hope. He feels the ripples pass through him, through the center of his chest where Oliver's voice still echoes every time the boy says the word Dad. 7 years ago. A summer that felt like everything. A departure that he understood as necessary and she understood as abandonment. A child who grew in the space between those two understandings, shaped by the one truth neither of them spoke. He left, and he did not look back, and she carried the consequences alone. He wants to say that it is different now. Wants to say that he will not leave, that he cannot leave, that leaving is no longer possible for him because he has seen the notebooks and held the drawings and watched his son flip a pancake with the confidence of a boy who has been learning this skill for years in a kitchen his father never entered. He wants to make promises that will land with weight, that will convince her, that will close the distance between them with the efficiency of a well-negotiated deal. But he has no evidence, no proof. Only 3 days in a town he did not know existed 2 weeks ago. Only burned pancakes and a rented sedan, and a watch that belonged to a man who died before certain truths could be spoken between father and son. Words are not what Clara needs. She has heard words before, from him, from others, from a world that speaks and does not follow through. She does not need another promise offered across a kitchen table. She needs mornings, dozens of them, hundreds. She needs him to keep arriving before dawn, keep burning things, keep sitting on porch steps in the dark until she opens the door. Trust is not a declaration made in a single moment of emotion. Trust is an accumulation. It is built from small deposits made consistently over time, and he has not made enough deposits yet to earn the withdrawal he wants to make. He reaches across the table, not for her hand. He does not have the right to take her hand yet. and he knows it the way he knows the weight of his father's watch on his wrist. He places his palm flat on the table surface, fingers open, an offering without a demand, a position that says, "I am here," and asks nothing in return except the chance to remain. Clara looks at his hand, at the flower still caught in the lines of his palm, the evidence of his attempts this morning, the record of every egg he cracked badly and every pancake he burned. At the watch just above his wrist, its crystal scratched, its face simple, its presence on his arm, a statement about what he values now that he has learned the difference between inheritance and legacy. She does not take his hand. Her fingers remain wrapped around her coffee cup. Her eyes remain on his face, searching for something she has not yet found, or searching for the strength to believe in something she has found, but is afraid to trust. But she does not move her hand away either. She does not stand up from the table. She does not tell him to leave. And in that space, in the distance between taking and refusing, between opening and closing, between the hand on the table and the hand on the cup, something fragile begins to form. Not trust, not yet, but the possibility of trust. The first foundation stone of something that might, with enough mornings, with enough burned pancakes, with enough quiet conversations at a wobbly table in a kitchen that smells like cinnamon and rising dough, become something they can both stand on. They sit like that for a long time, long enough for the coffee to cool, long enough for the sunlight to shift across the kitchen floor, long enough for a man who has spent his entire adult life measuring time in quarters and fiscal years and return on investment, to understand that the most important moments cannot be measured at all. They can only be lived. #The Last Promise, Part 2, Revised. Cold open recap, 30 seconds. In Part 1, we watched a man learn to make pancakes. But this was never really about pancakes. Ethan Blackwood, heir to a hotel empire, a man who spent 7 years not knowing he had a son, stood in Clara's kitchen at dawn and burned his first attempt at breakfast. His 8-year-old boy, Oliver, climbed onto a blue stool with his name scratched into the paint and taught his father how to wait for bubbles, how to flip without fear, how to make something golden from ingredients that looked like failure. We saw the notebooks. 7 years of drawings. A faceless father drawn every single day by a boy who believed, without proof, without contact, without a single reason to hope, that someday the blank space would be filled. We saw Clara hold the door open, not because she trusts him, because she's giving him the chance to earn it. But what we didn't see, what was happening in the shadows while pancakes were burning and stars were being counted and a father was learning the weight of his son's hand, was the woman watching, the woman reporting, the woman who has spent 3 years standing at the center of Ethan Blackwood's life, managing his calendar, booking his flights, knowing his passwords and his schedule and every private detail of his days. The woman who was never loyal to him at all. Welcome to Part 2. If you thought you knew where this story was going, you were wrong. If you thought Eleanor Blackwood was the only enemy in this fight, you weren't paying attention. And if you thought trust was the hardest thing Ethan would have to build, you haven't met the truth yet. Stay with me. This is where everything breaks. Act 1, The Spy. The second floor office of the Mercer Grand Hotel occupies a corner of the building that looks out over the city through windows that stretch from floor to ceiling, offering a view that most people would pay considerable money simply to stand in front of for 10 minutes. At 10:40, 7 in the morning, the light coming through those windows falls in long rectangles across the polished hardwood floor, illuminating a desk that holds a laptop, a tablet, 2 phones, and a leather portfolio embossed with initials that do not belong to the woman sitting behind it. The woman is Renee Torres, and she has occupied this desk for 3 years as the executive assistant to a man whose schedule she manages with the precision of an air traffic controller and whose life she knows more intimately than most of his family members. She knows what time he wakes up. She knows which coffee he prefers and which meetings make him tense and which phone calls he takes in private with the door closed. She knows the difference between his business voice and his personal voice. She knows when he's lying to himself. And she knows something he does not know she knows, that for the past 3 days he has been in a town called Millbrook, learning to make pancakes for a son he didn't know existed until 2 weeks ago. She did not learn this from him. He has not called her once since he left. has not responded to her emails about the quarterly review or the renovation timeline or the board meeting that was supposed to happen yesterday and did not happen because the man who was supposed to lead it sent a one-to-line message at midnight saying only, postpone everything. I'll explain when I can. She learned it from the same place she learns everything that matters about Ethan Blackwood's life, from his mother. Renee picks up one of the phones, the one that is not connected to the Blackwood International Network, the one that does not sync with the corporate servers, the one whose call log is never reviewed by the IT department because it does not officially exist, and dials a number she has memorized but never saved in her contacts. The phone rings twice before it is answered, and the voice on the other end does not say hello or good morning or anything resembling a greeting. It simply waits, because Eleanor Blackwood does not waste words on pleasantries when efficiency will serve. Renee's voice when she speaks is professional and neutral, the same tone she uses during investor briefings and board presentations, the voice of a woman delivering information without editorializing. He made pancakes, she says. With the boy. He burned most of them, set off the smoke detector twice. The boy taught him how to flip. They ate together at the kitchen table. The mother was present but kept her distance. She watched from her chair. She didn't help. Silence on the other end of the line. The kind of silence that costs money to maintain. The silence of a woman who can afford to let other people fill the empty space with anxiety while she calculates. Renee continues. She has learned over 3 years of making these calls that Eleanor prefers information delivered in layers, from the observable to the interpretive, from the facts to the implications. He spent 2 hours in the boy's room this morning, looking at drawings. The boy has notebooks, dozens of them according to the report, pictures of a father he's never met. He draws them every day. Does the boy know who his father is now? Yes, they've met. 3 days ago, in the park, the boy approached him. Another silence, longer this time. Renee can hear something in the background on Eleanor's end. Not voices, but the particular kind of quiet that exists in large spaces designed to impress. Eleanor is in the penthouse, the one with the view of the park, the one with ceilings so high that sound disappears into them like smoke. He's different. Renee hears herself say the words before she has fully decided to say them, and there is something in her voice now that was not there a moment ago, something that edges toward observation rather than report. He smiled, Mrs. Blackwood, while the boy was showing him how to wait for the bubbles in the batter. I haven't seen him smile like that in the 3 years I've worked for him. She pauses, considers whether to say the next part, says it anyway, maybe ever. The silence that follows is not the calculating kind. It is the disapproving kind, the kind that communicates, without a single word spoken, that Renee has just crossed a line. That observations are expected, but opinions are not. That her job is to report what Ethan Blackwood does, not to interpret what it means or how it makes him feel. Eleanor's voice returns, precise as a surgical instrument, every syllable measured and placed with intention. Book me a car to Millbrook, something discreet, nothing that draws attention. A sedan, not a luxury vehicle. I don't want anyone in that town remembering the car, and I need a driver who knows how to be quiet, not one of the regulars. Someone from outside the usual rotation. Renee's pen stops moving across the notepad where she has been recording the conversation in shorthand that only she can read. There is a fraction of a second, so brief that she would deny it if anyone ever noticed, so small that it does not register on any external measure of her behavior, where something moves across her face that is not professionalism. She is thinking about Oliver, about the photograph she saw on the tablet this morning, transmitted from Millbrook through channels she helped establish, showing a boy with dark hair, sticking up on one side from sleep, standing in a kitchen doorway in pajamas with planets on them. She is thinking about the word the boy used when he saw his father at the stove, Dad, and the way the report described it, the way the word landed like something small and fragile being tested to see if it would hold weight. She is thinking about the fact that she has just helped set in motion whatever Eleanor Blackwood is about to do to that boy's mother. Of course, Mrs. Blackwood, what time should I schedule the car? Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock, and Renee. Eleanor pauses, and in that pause there is the weight of 3 years of employment, 3 years of loyalty, 3 years of checks deposited into Renee's account on the 1st of every month, in amounts that made her teaching salary look like pocket change. I want to know everything he does between now and then, every conversation, every place he goes. If he so much as buys a cup of coffee in that town, I want to know about it before he takes the first sip. Am I clear? Perfectly clear. She hangs up, sets the phone down on the desk beside the tablet, which displays 2 sets of notes in 2 separate applications. The first set is for him, the man whose schedule she manages, whose travel she arranges, whose life she has organized for 3 years with a competence that has never once been questioned. This set contains meetings and conference calls and the renovation timeline for the property in the 4th city, all the ordinary machinery of running an empire that spans continents and employs thousands of people. The second set is in a separate file, encrypted with a password she changes every week, transferred through a secure connection to an email address that belongs to his mother. This set contains everything else: observations, patterns, details about where he goes and what he does and who he sees when he thinks no one is watching, the name of the town where he disappeared to 3 days ago, the address of the house where he has been staying until dawn, the school schedule of an 8-year-old boy named Oliver, who walks to Henderson Park on Tuesdays and Thursdays and sits on the second bench from the fountain to eat his lunch, alone, always alone, until 3 days ago. Renee looks at those 2 files side by side on the screen, one labeled Blackwood International, one labeled Personal, and something stirs behind her professional. Composure, something that feels uncomfortably like the earliest stage of a question she has never allowed herself to ask. She has been doing this for 3 years, collecting information, transmitting reports, serving 2 masters who share a last name but little else. She has told herself stories about why this is acceptable, about loyalty to the family as a whole, about protecting a legacy that matters more than any individual within it, about how Eleanor hired her first, before Ethan even knew she existed, and the terms of her employment were clear from the beginning. She works for the family, not the man. Those stories have always been sufficient. They have always settled the stirring before it became anything she had to examine. She pushes the feeling down now, the way she always does. Efficiently, completely, without a trace. But it is getting harder. If you have ever worked for someone and realized too late that you were on the wrong side, type the word loyalty in the comments. Because Renee is about to learn what happens when you serve 2 masters, and one of them is a mother who will do anything to protect her version of family. The network Eleanor Blackwood built to monitor her son's life did not happen overnight. It was constructed carefully, methodically, over the course of years, the way you build anything designed to last. It began small, a private investigator hired to follow up on a suspicion, a concern, a mother's intuition that her son was not telling her everything about his life. That investigator found nothing alarming. A few dinners with women who did not last past the 3rd date. Business trips that were exactly what they appeared to be. A life so controlled, so predictable, so thoroughly managed that there was nothing to report, except the absence of anything worth reporting. But Eleanor is not a woman who accepts absence as an answer. Absence means something is hidden. Absence means there are questions she has not yet learned to ask. So she expanded the network, hired a second investigator to watch the first one, to verify the reports, to make sure she was getting truth and not the sanitized version of truth that people offer when they think you cannot handle complications. She cultivated relationships with people in her son's orbit, assistants and drivers and doormen, and the concierge at the building where he keeps his penthouse. Not through explicit requests for information. Eleanor is far too sophisticated for that. She cultivated them through kindness, through generous tips at Christmas, through remembering birthdays, through the small, steady accumulation of goodwill that makes a person feel seen, valued, appreciated. And then, when the goodwill had been built up sufficiently, she made casual inquiries, asked innocent questions, expressed a mother's natural concern about whether her son was eating properly, sleeping enough, taking care of himself in the aftermath of his father's death. The people in his orbit answered those questions because they seemed harmless, because Eleanor seemed worried, because she was his mother, and mothers are supposed to worry. They did not realize they were being recruited. By the time Renee Torres arrived 3 years ago, young, competent, hungry for an opportunity that would pay off her student loans and give her access to the kind of professional network that most assistants spend a decade trying to build. The surveillance infrastructure was already in place. Renee was simply the crown jewel, the person closest to Ethan, the person who controlled his calendar and his communications and his travel, the person who could see not just what he did, but what he planned to do, what he was thinking about doing, what he had decided not to do, and why. Eleanor did not hire Renee and then corrupt her. She hired someone who was already willing to be corrupted, someone whose resume looked perfect but whose references, when checked carefully by people who knew how to read between the lines, revealed a pattern, a history of loyalty to whoever paid the most, a pragmatism that prioritized advancement over principle, a willingness to see employment as a transaction rather than a relationship. Eleanor recognized that pattern because she had spent 63 years watching people, studying them, learning to identify the ones who could be bought and the ones who could not. Renee could be bought. The price was not even particularly high, a salary 3 times what Ethan would have offered, a performance bonus tied not to his success but to the quality of information she provided, and the implicit promise, never spoken aloud, never written in any contract, but communicated clearly through tone and implication, that her future with the Blackwood family depended not on serving Ethan well, but on serving Eleanor better. Renee accepted those terms. She has been operating under them for 3 years, and until this morning, until the phone call about the pancakes and the boy and the smile she had never seen before, she had never questioned whether the terms were fair. But something shifted this morning, some small internal recalibration that she does not yet have words for. It started when she saw the photograph of Oliver, not the surveillance photo taken from a distance by someone Eleanor hired to monitor the house in Millbrook. The other one, the one that showed up in the report with a caption that read, "Subject's son, 8 years old, name, Oliver, interests, drawing, astronomy, pancakes." The photograph showed a boy sitting at a kitchen table with a notebook open in front of him, his tongue pressed between his teeth in concentration, his hand moving across the page with the careful deliberation of someone making something that matters. The light from the window behind him turned his hair into a halo. He looked small. He looked happy. He looked like a child who had no idea that his existence was being catalogued and reported and analyzed by people who had never met him and never would. Renee looked at that photograph for longer than she needed to, longer than the job required, long enough that she had to close the file and walk away from her desk and stand at the window looking out at nothing until the feeling passed, the feeling that she was doing something wrong, the feeling that a boy who draws stars in a notebook and eats pancakes with his father should not have his life turned into data points in a file that gets transmitted every week to a woman who sees him not as a grandson but as a problem to be managed. She pushed the feeling down, went back to her desk, opened the file again, did her job, but the feeling did not stay down. It is still there now, sitting in her chest like something with weight, something that presses against her ribs when she breathes. The tablet on her desk chimes. A new message in the encrypted application. She opens it. The message is from one of Eleanor's investigators, not the one who has been watching the house in Millbrook, but a different one, someone Renee has never met and whose name she does not know. The message contains a single line of text and an attachment. The text reads, "Financial records, bakery startup costs. Thought Eb would want to see this." The attachment is a PDF. Renee opens it. The document is a bank statement from 7 years ago, showing a wire transfer in the amount of $100,000 deposited into an account belonging to Clara Hartley. The memo line on the transfer reads, "For the child, not for you." Renee stares at the screen, reads the memo line again, and then a third time, because the words do not make sense in the configuration her brain wants them to make sense in. Eleanor gave Clara money, $100,000. 7 years ago, before Oliver was born, or right after. The dates on the statement are hard to read, slightly blurred in the scan, but the year is clear, the amount is clear, and the memo line is very, very clear. For the child, not for you. This was not a gift. This was a payment, a transaction. Eleanor Blackwood, who has spent the last 3 days preparing to travel to Millbrook, who has spent years monitoring her son's movements, who has built an entire surveillance operation to make sure nothing in Ethan's life escapes her notice, gave Clara $100,000 and told her it was for Oliver. And Clara took it. Renee sits back in her chair. The leather creaks beneath her weight. Outside the window, the city continues its ordinary business. Cars moving through intersections, people walking on sidewalks, the sun climbing toward noon like it does every day, indifferent to the small human dramas unfolding in the buildings below. She picks up the phone. Not the encrypted one, the regular one, the one connected to the Blackwood International network. She dials Ethan's number. It rings 4 times before going to voicemail. His voice on the recording is professional, clipped, the voice of a man who does not waste time on unnecessary words. You've reached Ethan Blackwood. Leave a message. Renee opens her mouth to speak, to warn him, to tell him that his mother is coming and that she has information about Clara and that whatever fragile trust he has been building over pancakes and notebooks is about to be tested in ways he is not prepared for. But she does not speak, because if she warns him, Eleanor will know. Eleanor will know that Renee called him, and when, and what was said, because Eleanor has access to the phone logs and the call records and every piece of data that moves through the Blackwood International system. And if Eleanor knows that Renee warned him, then Renee's employment, her salary, her bonuses, her future with the family, ends. Not gradually, not with a performance review or a conversation about fit. Immediately, completely, the way a door closes when someone on the other side decides you are no longer useful. Renee hangs up without leaving a message. She closes the laptop, stands from the desk, walks to the window and looks out at the city and feels the weight in her chest press harder against her ribs. She has made her choice, the same choice she has made every week for 3 years. The choice to serve Eleanor. The choice to prioritize her own security over the man she is supposed to be helping. The choice to be the kind of person who sees a photograph of an 8-year-old boy drawing stars and feels something shift in her chest, but does not let that shift change what she does next. The choice to be a spy. If loyalty is tested by what you do when no one is watching, Renee just failed. Type the word complicit in the comments if you have ever kept quiet when you should have spoken up. Because silence is not neutral. Silence is a choice. And Renee just chose Eleanor. The penthouse Eleanor Blackwood occupies on the 42nd floor of a building that overlooks Central Park was not purchased. It was inherited. Her husband, Ethan's father, a man who built the Blackwood hotel empire from a single property in Boston and expanded it across 3 continents before a heart attack took him at 61. Bought this apartment 30 years ago when the building was new and the neighborhood was still becoming what it is now. He bought it as an investment. Eleanor made it a fortress. Every surface in this apartment has been chosen for what it communicates. The marble floors imported from Italy. The art on the walls. Not prints, originals. Each one selected, not because Eleanor loves it, but because it holds value. Because value is the language she speaks fluently. The furniture arranged with the precision of a stage set, every chair positioned to offer a view, every table placed to facilitate conversation or display, or the particular kind of intimidation that comes from sitting across from someone in a room that cost more than their childhood home. This is not a place where people live. This is a place where power resides. Eleanor sits now in the study, a room with floor-to-ceiling windows that look out over the park, the trees below rendered small and distant, a landscape of green reduced to decoration. Her desk is antique, mahogany, a piece that belonged to her own father and his father before him, its surface polished to a depth that makes it look like you could fall into it. On that desk sits a single file folder, cream-colored, unmarked, closed. Inside that folder is everything Eleanor knows about Clara Hartley. She has not opened it yet. She does not need to. She has read its contents so many times over the past 7 years that the information is encoded in her memory with the same permanence as her own address, her own birth date, the combination to the safe in the bedroom where she keeps the jewelry her husband gave her and has not worn since he died. Clara Marie Hartley, 29 years old, born in a town 2 hours north of Millbrook to parents who divorced when she was 12. Raised primarily by her mother, a woman who worked as a bookkeeper for a medical practice and died of breast cancer when Clara was 19. No siblings. No extended family within 300 miles. Attended community college for 2 years, studying elementary education, before running out of money and dropping out. Worked a series of jobs after that. Waitress, retail clerk, receptionist at a law firm where she lasted 8 months before being let go for reasons the file does not specify, but Eleanor can guess. Young, pretty, probably caught the eye of someone she should not have caught the eye of. Probably made choices that seemed reasonable at the time and turned out to be mistakes. Met Ethan 7 years ago during the summer he spent in Boston, ostensibly overseeing the renovation of the Blackwood Grand, but actually recovering from his father's death in the only way he knew how, by working himself into exhaustion and pretending that exhaustion was the same thing as grief. Clara was working at a coffee shop near the hotel. Ethan stopped in every morning for 3 months. By the end of the summer, they were spending evenings together. By the time he left to return to New York, she was pregnant. Eleanor knows this not because Ethan told her, he did not tell her, did not mention Clara at all, did not give any indication that the summer had been anything other than work, but because Eleanor made it her business to know. Because mothers know when their sons are lying by omission. Because the way Ethan said he was fine when he returned from Boston was the same way he said he was fine after his father's funeral, and Eleanor knew both times that fine was a word he used to end conversations, not to describe his actual state. So she investigated, hired someone to look into what her son had been doing during those months in Boston, who he had been seeing, whether there were complications she needed to manage. The investigator found Clara, found the coffee shop, found the evenings that stretched into nights, found the pregnancy test purchased at a pharmacy 2 weeks after Ethan returned to New York. And Eleanor made a decision. She could tell Ethan. Let him know that the woman he had spent the summer with was pregnant. Let him decide what to do about it. Whether to acknowledge the child, support Clara, integrate this unexpected development into his life in whatever way he chose. Or she could handle it herself. Eleanor chose to handle it herself. Not because she is cruel. Eleanor does not think of herself as cruel. She thinks of herself as realistic. As someone who understands that young men make mistakes, that unplanned pregnancies complicate lives in ways that cannot be uncomplicated, that a child born to a woman with no family and no education and no prospects is a liability, not a blessing. She contacted Clara directly, not through an intermediary. Eleanor does not delegate the important conversations. She took the train to Boston, met Clara at the coffee shop where she worked, sat across from her at a small table near the window, and made an offer. $100,000, deposited into Clara's account within 24 hours. Enough to cover medical expenses. Enough to get her started somewhere new, somewhere far from Boston, somewhere Ethan would never accidentally encounter her. Enough to give her options. The terms were simple. Clara would not contact Ethan. Would not tell him about the pregnancy, would not make any claim on him or his family or the Blackwood name. She would take the money, leave Boston, and raise the child alone. If she needed more money later, for medical emergencies, for education, for anything the initial sum did not cover, she could request it, and Eleanor would consider the request. But there would be no relationship, no visits, no integration of this child into the family. The money was for the child's welfare, not for Clara's benefit. Not to buy her silence. Eleanor was careful about that, careful to frame it as support rather than suppression, but to ensure that the child had what it needed without disrupting Ethan's life. Clara took the money. Eleanor has never been entirely certain whether Clara took it because she agreed with the terms or because she had no other option. The distinction has never mattered to her. The outcome was the same either way. Ethan never knew. Clara left Boston. The child was born in Millbrook, a town small enough that Eleanor's investigators could monitor it from a distance without drawing attention, large enough that a single mother with a baby would not be remarkable. For 7 years, the arrangement held. Clara kept her side of the bargain, did not contact Ethan, did not make claims, raised the boy quietly, modestly, in a house she rented, and eventually bought using money she earned from a bakery she started with the remainder of Eleanor's payment. For 7 years, Eleanor believed she had made the right decision, that she had protected her son from a complication he was not ready for, that she had given Clara and the child a better life than they would have had otherwise, that everyone involved had benefited from her intervention. And then, 3 days ago, Oliver walked across a park and introduced himself to his father. Eleanor did not see it coming. Her investigators reported that the boy was shy, quiet, more likely to avoid strangers than approach them. They reported that Clara kept him close, carefully supervised, protective in the way single mothers are protective when they know the world is not a safe place for children who do not have the resources to protect themselves. They did not report that the boy was brave, that he had been drawing pictures of his father every day for 7 years, that he had been waiting, that he had been counting. Eleanor opens the file folder on her desk, flips through the pages, bank statements, photographs, school records, medical records, everything her investigators have compiled over 7 years of watching Clara and Oliver from a distance. She stops at the photograph of the bakery. A small storefront on a street corner in Millbrook, brick facade, hand, painted sign that reads Clara's in blue letters, a window display showing bread and pastries arranged on white plates. $100,000. Clara used Eleanor's money to start that bakery, to build a business, to create a life, to prove that she could take what was offered and make something of it, something more than survival, something that looked like success. And now Ethan is in that town, sitting in that woman's kitchen, eating pancakes with a boy he has known for 3 days, building trust on a foundation that includes Eleanor's money and Clara's silence and 7 years of lies by omission. Eleanor closes the file, stands from the desk, walks to the window and looks out at the park below, at the paths where people are walking their dogs and pushing strollers and living their small, ordinary lives, unaware that 2 floors above them, a woman is deciding how to dismantle a family that has just begun to form. She is not doing this to be cruel. She wants that to be clear. She wants anyone who might judge her to understand that this is not cruelty. This is protection. This is a mother doing what mothers do when they see their children making mistakes that will cost them more than they understand. Ethan is falling in love with Clara. Eleanor can see it in the reports, in the smile Renee described, in the fact that he has not returned a single phone call or email in 3 days, in the way he is spending his mornings in a kitchen, learning to make pancakes instead of running the empire his father built and left to him. He is falling in love with a woman who took money to stay silent, a woman who agreed to keep his son a secret, a woman who built her life on a transaction that Ethan knows nothing about. And when he finds out, when Eleanor tells him, because she will tell him, because the only way to protect him from Clara is to show him who Clara really is, he will be devastated. He will feel betrayed. He will question everything he thought he was building with her. But he will also be free. Free from a woman who was willing to take money instead of fighting for the father of her child. Free from a relationship built on a foundation that was cracked from the beginning. Free to return to his real life, his real responsibilities, the empire that needs him more than a boy with a notebook and a woman with a bakery ever could. Eleanor picks up her phone, sends a text to the driver she hired for tomorrow morning. "Pick me up at 8, I'll be ready." Then she sends a second text. This one to Renee. "I need the address of the bakery, and I need to know what time Clara is usually there alone." The response comes back in less than 30 seconds. Bakery address is 147 Main Street. Clara is usually there alone between 11 and noon, when the morning rush ends and before the lunch crowd starts. Oliver is at school. No staff on Tuesdays. Eleanor reads the message twice, commits it to memory, deletes it. Tomorrow is Tuesday. Tomorrow, Eleanor Blackwood is going to Millbrook, not to meet her grandson, not to reconcile with the woman who gave birth to him, not to build bridges or extend olive branches, or do any of the things a grandmother might do when she discovers she has a grandchild she never knew existed. Tomorrow, Eleanor is going to war, and the weapon she is bringing is the truth. If you have ever watched someone weaponize the truth, turn a fact into a knife and aim it directly at the person you love, type the word weapon in the comments. Because what Eleanor is about to do will destroy something that took 3 days to build, and she will do it with a smile. The car that arrives at Eleanor's building at 8 o'clock on Tuesday morning is exactly what she requested, discreet. A dark grey sedan, recent model but not new, clean but not ostentatious. The kind of car that could belong to anyone, and therefore belongs to no one in particular. The kind of car that disappears from memory 5 minutes after you see it. The driver is a man in his 50s, wearing a dark suit that has been worn enough times that it no longer looks like a costume. His name is Paul, and he has been driving for Eleanor's preferred car service for 6 years, though this is the first time she has requested him specifically. He does not speak unless spoken to. He does not play music. He does not ask questions. When Eleanor called the service yesterday and asked for a driver who understood discretion, they gave her Paul's name without hesitation. Paul opens the rear door when Eleanor emerges from the building. She is dressed simply today, or what passes for simply in Eleanor Blackwood's wardrobe. A cream silk suit, tailored to fit her frame with the precision that only comes from a dressmaker who has been making her clothes for 20 years. Low-heeled shoes, practical for walking but expensive enough that anyone who knows shoes will recognize the brand. A single strand of pearls at her throat. Hair arranged in a chignon so precise it could have been assembled by an architect. And in her arms, wrapped in paper that matches her suit, a bouquet of white lilies. She does not speak to Paul when she settles into the back seat. Simply nods when he closes the door and moves to the driver's seat. The car pulls away from the curb and into the morning traffic, heading north out of the city, toward the highway that will take them to Millbrook. The drive takes 90 minutes. Eleanor spends the first 30 looking out the window, watching the city give way to suburbs, the suburbs give way to smaller towns, the landscape flattening into the particular geography of rural areas that exist in the spaces between places people have heard of. She does not check her phone, does not review the file she brought with her, does not rehearse what she will say when she arrives. She does not need to rehearse. She has known what she will say since the moment she learned that Ethan was in Millbrook, since the moment Renee described the smile, since the moment she understood that her son was not simply meeting his child, he was building a life with the woman who gave birth to that child, a life that did not include Eleanor, a life that existed outside her influence, beyond her control, in a town she had never visited and a kitchen she had never seen. Eleanor Blackwood has spent 63 years making sure that nothing important in her family's life happens without her knowledge or consent. She has managed businesses and marriages and crises and successions. She has navigated boardrooms and courtrooms and the complicated politics of wealth that most people never see because they exist behind closed doors in rooms where the real decisions get made. She has never lost control of anything that mattered. Until now. Until a boy with a notebook walked across a park and changed the trajectory of her son's life without asking her permission. The highway gives way to smaller roads, 2 lanes instead of 4, trees pressing close on both sides, houses set back from the road, separated by fields and fences, and the kind of distance that comes from land being cheap enough that people can afford space. Eleanor watches these houses pass, modest homes, well-maintained but not expensive, the kinds of places where people raise children and grow vegetables and fix their own plumbing because hiring someone costs more than the repair is worth, the kinds of places Eleanor has never lived and cannot imagine living. At 9:30, Paul turns onto Main Street in Millbrook. The town is exactly what Eleanor expected, small, quiet, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone and strangers are noticed. Brick storefronts line both sides of the street, a hardware store, a pharmacy, a diner, with a chalkboard sign advertising the daily special. And there, on the corner where Main Street intersects with Oak, a bakery with a hand-painted sign that reads Clara's. "Stop here," Eleanor says. Her first words since entering the car 90 minutes ago. Paul pulls to the curb across the street from the bakery, puts the car in park, does not turn off the engine, waits. Eleanor looks at the bakery through the car window. The morning rush has ended. Through the window, she can see a handful of customers inside, 2 people at the counter, one sitting at a small table near the window with a newspaper and a cup of coffee. The door opens, and a woman exits carrying a paper bag, the kind bakeries use for bread. The door closes behind her, and the bell above it rings once, bright and cheerful, announcing the exit the same way it announced the entrance. Clara is visible through the window, behind the counter, wearing an apron, her hair pulled back in a braid. She's handing something to the customer at the counter, a pastry, wrapped in wax paper, placed into a small bag with care. She smiles at the customer, says something that makes the customer laugh. The interaction is easy, familiar, the kind of exchange that happens 1,000 times in small-town bakeries between people who see each other every week and know each other's orders. Eleanor watches this interaction with the focus of a general surveying a battlefield. Clara is comfortable here, confident. This is her space, her business, her town. She has built something in Millbrook that belongs to her, something that has nothing to do with the Blackwood name, or the Blackwood money, or the life Ethan leads in Manhattan. Except it does have something to do with the Blackwood money, because the bakery was started with Eleanor's $100,000. Because every loaf of bread Clara sells, every pastry she wraps, every smile she gives to customers in this town that embraced her, all of it exists because Eleanor made it possible, and Clara never told Ethan. Eleanor opens the car door, steps out onto the sidewalk. Paul remains in the driver's seat, engine running, ready to leave the moment she returns. She crosses the street. The lilies are heavy in her arms, their scent strong enough to announce her presence before she reaches the door. She pushes the door open. The bell rings. Every head in the bakery turns toward the sound, and Eleanor Blackwood walks into Clara's life with a smile on her face and a weapon in her hands disguised as flowers. The bell above the bakery door rings when Eleanor enters, and the sound cuts through the low murmur of conversation like a signal. The two customers at the counter look up. The man with the newspaper at the table near the window glances over the top of his reading glasses. And behind the counter, Clara freezes. Her hands are in the middle of wrapping a cinnamon roll in wax paper, her fingers holding the edges of the paper together, but the movement stops the moment she sees who has just walked through her door. Because she knows who this woman is. She has never met her, has never seen her in person, but she knows. Eleanor Blackwood does not look like someone who belongs in a small-town bakery. She looks like someone who belongs in boardrooms and penthouses and rooms where decisions get made that affect people 3 continents away. Her cream silk suit is immaculate. Her posture is perfect. Her expression is pleasant, warm even, the expression of a woman who has come to visit and bring flowers and meet people she has been looking forward to meeting. But Clara sees past the expression, sees the calculation behind it, sees the way Eleanor's eyes move across the bakery, taking in the chalkboard menu, the display case, the small tables, the customers, cataloguing everything, assessing it, measuring it against some internal standard that Clara knows she will fail. Eleanor walks to the counter with the measured pace of a woman who has never hurried in her life. She sets the lilies on the counter between herself and Clara. Not offered. Set down. The stems wrapped in cream paper that matches her suit. The blooms open and fragrant and overwhelming in the small space. "You must be Clara," Eleanor says. Her voice is pleasant, conversational, the voice of someone making an introduction at a dinner party. "I'm Eleanor Blackwood, Ethan's mother." She pauses, lets that land. "And Oliver's grandmother." The entire bakery goes silent. The customer at the counter who was waiting for her cinnamon roll. The man with the newspaper. The 2 people who had been talking near the door. Everyone stops. Everyone turns. Because, in a small town, when a stranger walks into a local business and announces herself as the grandmother of a boy everyone knows, that is not a private moment. That is news. Clara's fingers tighten on the wax paper. She does not look at the customers, does not acknowledge their attention. She keeps her eyes on Eleanor and her voice steady when she speaks. "We should talk in the back." "What a lovely idea," Eleanor says. She picks up the lilies, carries them with her as she moves toward the counter's edge, toward the swinging door that leads to the kitchen, as if she has been invited, as if this is her space to navigate. Clara sets down the half-wrapped cinnamon roll, wipes her hands on her apron, looks at the customer who has been waiting. "I'll be right back, Sarah. Help yourself to coffee while you wait." The customer, a woman in her 60s who has been coming to this bakery since Clara opened it 5 years ago, nods slowly. But her eyes follow Clara as she walks toward the kitchen door, concerned, protective. The way neighbors are protective in small towns when they sense that one of their own is being threatened. Clara pushes through the kitchen door. Eleanor follows. The door swings shut behind them, and the warm noise of the bakery is replaced by a different kind of sound. The hum of the commercial oven, the tick of the cooling rack, the drip of the sink faucet that Clara has been meaning to fix for 3 weeks. Eleanor moves through the kitchen without asking permission, trailing her fingertips along the stainless steel counter, touching the hook where Clara's apron hangs between shifts, picking up a handwritten recipe card from beside the flour bin, Clara's grandmother's recipe for cinnamon rolls, stained with butter and age, and reading it before setting it back in its place. Every touch is a message. Every gesture is a sentence being written in a language Clara understands perfectly. "I could take all of this from you. You've done well for yourself," Eleanor says. She is standing with her back to Clara now, examining the framed health inspection certificate on the wall as though it interests her, all things considered. The words land, not as a compliment, but as a diagnosis, an assessment of what Clara has managed to achieve, given her limitations, her circumstances, her obvious unsuitability for anything larger. Clara stands with her back against the wall next to the oven. The heat presses against her shoulder through the fabric of her shirt. Her pulse beats in her fingertips, fast and hard, the rhythm of a body preparing for a fight it does not know how to have. "Say what you came to say." Eleanor turns. Her face is composed, pleasant, the face of a woman having an ordinary conversation about ordinary matters. But her eyes are something else entirely. "Oliver," she says, "not the child, not your boy." His name, spoken with the familiarity of someone who has been saying it for years, in rooms Clara never entered, in conversations Clara was never part of. He attends Millbrook Elementary. Mrs. Patterson, 3rd grade, room 14, B. He walks to school along Birch Lane, takes the shortcut through the park, and sits on the second bench from the fountain to eat his lunch. Alone, she pauses, lets that word breathe, lets it fill the kitchen. He prefers the left swing, the one with the squeaky chain, and in February he missed 4 days of school with a chest cold that you treated with, over the counter cough syrup, instead of taking him to a proper doctor. Clara's fingers move to her collarbone, press against the hollow of her throat, the gesture she makes when words are too dangerous to release. "I know everything about him, Clara. I have always known. Did you really think I would just forget that my son could have a child somewhere in the world and I wouldn't make it my business to know, that I would simply allow this?" She gestures at the kitchen, at the bakery, at the life Clara has built, to continue without keeping a record. "What do you want?" Eleanor picks up a mixing bowl from the counter, examines it as though checking for flaws, sets it back in its place with a small, precise click of ceramic against steel. "I want what is best for my family. That has never included you." She sets the lilies on the counter. The white blooms sit there like a declaration, their heavy scent filling the kitchen, mixing with the smell of bread and cinnamon in a way that feels wrong, invasive, like something that does not belong being forced into a space that was fine without it. "Before you decide that I'm the villain in this story," Eleanor says, and her voice is quieter now, more dangerous in its quietness, "you should remember that I gave you a choice 7 years ago. I offered you money. You took it. I asked you to stay away from my son. You agreed. Everything you have, this bakery, this town, the life you built for yourself and your boy, you have because I made it possible. I took that money for Oliver." "And what did you do with it, Clara? Did you put it in a trust for his education? Did you save it for medical emergencies? Or did you use it to buy this building and start a business and build yourself a life that looks like independence but is actually built on Blackwood money?" The question hangs in the air between them. Clara does not answer, cannot answer, because the answer is visible in every surface of this kitchen, in every loaf of bread cooling on the rack, in every receipt in the register out front. Eleanor sees the silence, recognizes it as confirmation. "That's what I thought," she says. "So before you tell my son that I'm the monster who kept you apart, before you paint yourself as the victim who was forced to raise a child alone, you might want to explain to him why you took $100,000 from his mother and never mentioned it. Why you built a business with money meant for your son's welfare. Why you agreed to stay silent and then acted surprised when he didn't come looking for you." She walks toward the door that leads back to the shop, pauses with her hand on the frame, turns to look at Clara one more time. "You'll lose him," she says quietly. "Just like before, every person who has ever tried to keep a Blackwood child from the Blackwood family has lost. I'll make sure of it this time. Not because I want to, understand that, Clara, because I have to, because you are not enough." She pushes through the door, back into the bakery, back into the space where customers are watching, where Sarah is still waiting for her cinnamon roll, where the man with the newspaper has lowered it completely and is no longer pretending not to listen. Eleanor smiles at them. The warm, gracious smile of a woman who has just had a pleasant conversation with her future daughter-in-law. She nods to Sarah, says something kind about the lovely smell of the bakery. "Thanks, Clara," loudly so everyone can hear, for taking the time to chat. And then she walks out the door, the bell ringing behind her, leaving the lilies on the counter in the kitchen like a flag planted in conquered territory. The white flowers sit there, funeral flowers, the kind you send when something has ended. And in the kitchen, Clara stands with her back against the wall and her hand at her throat and tears in her eyes that she will not let fall, because falling is what Eleanor wants. Falling is what Eleanor came here to see,